Hello! Welcome to part 2. In part 1 of the Azara series, I talked about the origin story of Azara, who would become the Lord of the Seven Sins. Now, I will talk about his war against the Chiton and the height of his power. So, after the conquest of the realm of Neforn, which he changed the name to Eogoth, he settled down and became a lazy, gluttonous king. So if you want to see how he and why he became this way, you can check out the first video of Azra, which I should put a card up at the end of the video. His lavish lifestyle cost him dearly, as he weighed a lot and things in his empire began to be run much more difficultly. Eventually, by 40,000 of the First Era, he decided to do a purge. He felt this way because many people serving him, such as Azar, who ran his empire, and Za-Mothman, who was responsible of the management of the army, started to look suspicious in the eyes of Azra. This is because, one, the Yovkanek rebellion occurred, which is a rebellion which happened after Azra refused to punish somebody who had abused and killed the child of a farmer. Azra's soldiers put down the rebellion, but without the massive, ruthless killings of men, women, and children which Azra had been accustomed to. He also felt that the empire was being ruled in a wrong way. This was because he felt that his empire was being ruled not with enough force, because Azora believed that force was necessary to keep people wrong, while Za-Muthman believed that his empire needed to be run in a much more pragmatic way. Za-Muthman was also trying to convince Azora to stop his massive feasts, and Azra believed that Za-Muthman was the head of the problems that were going on in his empire. Azra felt Za-Mothman's suggestions as an attack at this point. Azra didn't view his seven sins as things. Azra didn't just view his seven sins as things he commonly did. He started to claim that he was the master of the seven sins, that they were a part of his personality, that they were something that every man should strive to be. He was the embodiment of evil and power, and that by being ruthless and powerful, one can achieve his truest power and achieve what he wishes and deserves. He believed anything that might hinder one's ability to project power was a idiotic idea, such as morals. So, when he began his purge, the purge would go on for thousand years, which killed many of his worshippers whom, in his eyes, failed to serve him. This did several things. One, it cemented that Azra had complete control over his empire and religion. And two, it cemented Azra as a powerful god who would not allow for any dissent and weakness to be shown in his religion, empire, and his personal life. This was seen as a massive projection of power by Azra, but it had very horrible consequences. Many people started to desert and abandon Azra, leaving his power greatly weakened. This also left many new believers to be killed or to even not join the religion in the first place, as they obviously didn't want to be killed by their own god. So eventually Azra decided to stop his first purge, but not after killing thousands of people who had great skills. At this point, though, he started to appoint people who claimed to be strong, but they really weren't. So he started a second purge. It wasn't because they were lying, but because they were lying to him. And that, and here's one of the things about Azra, is that he hates people who pretend to be strong to him. He really hates it. So these purges would kill millions, since he attacked the peasantry as well, and the cracks were starting to show in his rule. This forced him to kidnap intellectuals and force them to be his servants. He did this by targeting his elite worshippers and nobility and kidnapping a lot of their male children often. They would have their identities changed, and oftentimes it would be made look like that the children were murdered. This caused a panic, which Azra decided to start by a third purge, this time focused on the citizenry. Millions more died before a rebellion would shake his empire to the core. It was known as the Nephornic Rebellion, as many powerful wizards and other people wanted to resurrect Nephorn from the dead and to overthrow Azra to reinstate his rule. The rebellion would last for a long period of time and would cost the lives of tens of millions of people, mostly by Azra's elite armies wiping out entire provinces. After 100 years of war, which was filled with battles, such as the Battle of Wilga Field, which saw the deaths of over 1 million rebel soldiers, and the Battle of If-Ia, which was mostly the same. Azor would eventually have a change of heart. This was because he eventually appointed a new advisor, a former slave named Nizgoya, who convinced him that the amount of murder was putting a stain on his image. This caused Azor to stop the purges and the mass slaughter and make a declaration. He declared that as long as the people that he ruled decided to be totally obedient, convert to his religion, and to do their duties, such as taxes and serve in the army, he would be more lenient towards them, granting them total salvation and forgiveness for any crimes against the religion. He became much more lenient in his administration, but only because he feared wide-scale rebellion again, which would cost him dearly. And so when I say lenient, when compared to kings and emperors, he was very, very strict. It's just now he wasn't going all, psycho crazy, murdering everybody that dares to speak against him. So things improved slightly in Eogoth. Now, things were far from great, or even good, but things began to somewhat stabilize. So, in 35,000 of the First Era, Azara's most powerful worshippers began to talk about something known as the Chiton. According to them, the Chiton was a group of gods who ruled over a realm known as Paradise. Azra initially ignored the talks at first, but as he heard about them more and more and more, he had enough and decided to investigate. This led to him ordering his worshippers to find the world of the Chiton, where the Chiton supposedly lived at. Soon enough, they found it. The Chiton called their realm Paradise, a land full of life and prosperity. So, once Azra learned about this, Azra sensed an opportunity. He was the conqueror of the world, but yet there was another world. So, he began preparations of his army, which would number 2 million at this point, and sent them to Paradise. Now, at this time, 2 million soldiers is an insane amount especially for an elite army. You could get higher numbers, but you'd have to have a lot of undertrained soldiers. A lot of Azul soldiers were trained or even veterans because a lot of these god soldiers or powerful beings can live hundreds of years, and they often have combat experience with rebellions or stuff like that, bandits too. So, before we talk about the invasion of Paradise, we better discuss why Azura made this choice. You see, before Azura was this bloated, before, before Azura, sorry about that, I gotta get back on track. You see, Azura before this was a very, very bloated man. He was so big that his servants eventually began to refer to him as Ixakas, which means realm-sized man. He also spent a lot of his time procreating with his thousands of different women to no avail. Basically put, he had thousands of children, but they really weren't worth anything to him. Through this period, and in certain periods of times, Azor would have many children, but most of them he shamed or ignored. Some would be killed by Azor simply because he didn't believe that they deserved to be in his bloodline due to their sheer weakness in his eyes. Azor was also regularly gifted concubines by the people who he ruled, which led to high tensions between the people he ruled and himself. His lust was uncontrollable, and so were the other sins which he bore. Eventually, after he heard about the Chiton in paradise, he felt a multitude of emotions. Anger, because he realized that he wasn't the conqueror of the entire world. Envy, because he felt envious that another people, especially multiple gods, could rule such a place. But most of all, pride. Pride in the sense that he felt that he could conquer another world and subjugate even more people under his rule and religion. Now, another thing to note is the religious aspects. Azor was not just the king of Eogoth, but was instead the Lord himself, Lord of the world. His title, Lord of the Seven Sins, wasn't created, and instead he took the titles of Lord of the Realm, Lord of Eogoth, and Lord of all men. His power came, just like every other god, through his worshippers in whom recognized his titles, and since he knew no other realm or title, and since no one else knew him, he could keep these titles without worry. This was also another reason why he wanted to invade paradise. His power could be under threat if he let them go. And why not increase the amount of titles in his name? And so Ozma did just that, and the invasion of paradise began. He sent his armies through the realm of paradise, slaughtering millions of people, soldiers, pets, monsters, and anything they could find. For about a year, things seemed to be going well for Ozma, until eventually Dathan, Lord of Loyalty, Order, and Justice, raised his own army, which was outnumbered by 50 to 1, which is 40,000 men against 2 million for reference, and he would be joined by Azua, Olius, the Lord of Death, and Yova, the Lord of Warriorship, Leadership, and Charisma. By the skill of Dathan, Olius, and Yova, and with the grace of some luck, Dathan managed to win, sustaining 10,000 casualties, while Azra sustained 500,000. Azra felt enraged and betrayed, so he recovered his forces and sent them east. This time, however, in the Battle of Solfagiro, there would be no luck. Dathan's forces were crushed, and him and Oleus were nearly killed. Afterwards, Azra ran a massive plundering spree, burning cities to the ground and taking what he could to power himself and his army. Then they reached the Council of Lords, which hosted the location in which each lord of the Chitin would meet. So the reason why he was able to basically do all of this advancement is because the Chitin was heavily underprepared, and many of the Chitin lords were not suited for combat. Azor's forces were completely ready for combat, and the Chitin really hadn't ever faced a threat like this. Especially seen by the amount of soldiers that they often would use to fight Azor, which was usually very heavily outnumbered. So, before we talk about that, we need to talk about some of the things that Azra did while he was in paradise. So, Azra at this time would officially adopt the title of the Lord of the Seven Sins. The main reason of this was because he needed a title which could stick, and his old titles were becoming null and void. This is because of three reasons. One, none of the lords recognized his title. He wasn't the king. He was the king of he wasn't the lord of Eogoth. He wasn't the lord of any of his titles. So, too, he felt that his titles, without actually controlling them, would cause many to betray him, as he hated people who pretended to be strong as much as he hated the weak. So, calling yourself the Lord of all men, when there's a lot of men who are worshipping another god, would basically be counterintuitive to his belief. And three, the titles started to show their cracks and were basically useless. And so Azor decided to grab a new title, one that he could be known for. And so eventually he took the title Lord of the Sins. He did this because, for one, he already had worshippers practice the seven sins. Second, a unique title like the Lord of the Seven Sins would make him more infamous around the spectrum of religion. This meant more potential worshippers, though at the cost of more potential enemies. Azra didn't mind the consequences, though. And thirdly, Azra truly felt that the seven sins were just a part of a warrior's life. For wrath, Azra believed that a warrior must be aggressive, strong, angry, and destructive. Lust, Azra believed that women were a prize that all warriors, strong warriors, deserved after major feats. So lust is just one out of several of the, I guess you could say, gifts that a warrior deserves. Greed. Azra believed a warrior must seek as much wealth and power as possible. Envy. Azra believed that a warrior must stay on top against his competitors and that the desire to take what someone else has is natural. Sloth. Azra believed that if a warrior was strong enough, he deserved to be lazy and that the weak needed to take burdens for him. Pride. Azra believed a warrior must always be prideful of himself completely. And gluttony. Azra believed that gluttony was one of the gifts that the strong deserve. And so you can see how this goes along with his mentality that, the strong need to dominate the weak, and the weak need to serve the strong or be killed by the strong. So Oswald would go on to remove his other titles, but in ceremonial ways, he oftentimes was referred to those titles by his worshippers, alongside the other titles that he had. With that out of the way, back to his conquests. And so, Azra entered the Council of Lords, and he did this in a way which caught the council completely off guard. He managed to slaughter many of the people there, and even some of the lords, like Esgina, the Lordess of Light. He went on to attack Dathan, who defended himself well. The fight was fierce, with both sides clashing swords and axes and getting very close to killing each other. However, it wasn't enough, and Dathan fell to the ground as Oswald went to finish him off with an axe blow to the skull. But then, someone came to the rescue. It was none other than a worker named Vilmicus Overseer, often known as Villicus Octavia. Just to pause for a moment, Villicus Octavia, as I'll usually refer to him as, is one of the most what's the word I'm looking for? Is one of the most important characters of my fantasy lore. And I mean it. He is one of the most important lords of Nurun. So, after his birth or whatever, he's one of the most important characters because of what he does. Vilmicus managed to use his skills to fight off Azra long enough to allow Dathan to escape. Eventually, Vilmicus would be badly hurt and forced to flee, but not without allowing for the many historic artifacts and many of the lords to escape the Council of Lords. Azra felt enraged by this, and so in response he burnt down any town, city, and the Council of Lords in response. He also declared that any man, woman, child, or even animal that dared not show total obedience to him would be a fair target to be killed. During this time, however, as the army began to run around slaughtering everything in sight, Dathan, Oleus, and the remnants of the Chiton formed a new army, which would soon enough attack Azara. Outnumbered 50 to 1 again, Dathan used a variety of tactics and skills to defeat Azra, mainly by having the most powerful Triton fight on the front line, which itself led to many casualties. Overall, though Dathan's army suffered over 20% casualties, Azra's army faced over 50% casualties. As a result, Azra at this point was draining resources and soldiers into what was essentially becoming a pointless war. And so he decided to go on the attack. However, before he launched his attack, he was severely wounded by several magical assassins, including the Lord of Bartering and the Conversation, Hercia Maul. This forced him to be sent back to Eogoth to begin recovery. In the meantime, his army's invasion turned out to be a huge disaster, and soon enough, over 90% of his army was killed. This is because, for one, the Triton began to recruit a lot more soldiers and were becoming much more professional. Two, Ozra's generals were often incompetent or were bloodthirsty, and they always went on the attack even when they shouldn't have. The Triton was able to exploit this and used very smart, I'll call them, defensive strategies which eventually drained their manpower. In the meanwhile, however, Ozma wasn't concerned with the invasion. He was concerned with his firstborn son, he called him. His name was Drakor, the future lord of curses and corruption. Drakor was born from a powerful woman who was named Diabella, who was the lordess of planning and organization. She was kidnapped and forced to perform tasks, which led to the birth of Drakor. So basically, she was forced to do things for him and to bear some of his children. So Diabella felt this as torture, as most women would probably feel in the situation. So, and she eventually managed to convince Ozra to let her go, but not before having a few more children with him as well. So she managed to do this by basically promising to infiltrate the Chiton and destroy them from within, which, to be fair to her, she would begin fulfilling her part of the bargain. If you are interested in seeing a Drakor video, let me know in the comments. I'll go about his backstory and how he plays a role in the religion. So, with the devastation of his army, Ozra felt defeated for the first time. He couldn't accept his defeat. He never had. So he came up with a plan. Ozra would just pretend that the invasion and everything had never happened. He forbid all talk of the invasion, which was punishable by death. And so, Ozra had been defeated. He would go on to rebuild his army, occasionally raiding the paradise, and preparing for the next invasion. Wow. I appreciate. Okay, but seriously though, I appreciate all of you for taking a bit of your day to watch this video. Please do all the things if you enjoyed the video. Liking, subscribing, checking out my community posts, and commenting. I really do want you to interact. I really do want you to interact more with me, as I do want to interact with my audience. And by commenting and checking on my community posts, you can do exactly that. Really, it would really make my day if I could get a small community of people who would regularly comment and check out my community posts and do all that stuff. I hope each and every one of you has a good day or night, and I'll see you all another time.